So, I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm not a very good anti-feminist. In fact, there are some feminist concepts that just don't bother me all that much. They just don't make me angry and don't hurt me in any particular way. And one of those concepts that honestly don't really bother me all too much, aside from one really important thing, which, spoiler alert, I think is the most important thing about the concept I'm about to describe, is the concept of both safe spaces and trigger warnings. But I'll focus more on trigger warnings today and talk about safe spaces, I guess maybe in the next video. So, I'm not gonna lie, trigger warnings, honestly, they don't bother me all that much. Even in practical application, they don't bother me. I oftentimes find trigger warnings to certainly be obnoxious. I certainly find them sometimes to be a little unnecessary, especially considering the subject matter we're going to discuss in, say, an argument, or in an article or a video. But honestly, can I honestly sit here and say trigger warnings really bother me all that much? My honest answer would be no, not really. I notice a lot of anti-feminists or other people don't like trigger warnings, and that's their prerogative. They can hate and mock trigger warnings all they want, but I really find their arguments about trigger warnings, why they don't like trigger warnings, to be mostly lacking. It almost seems like they don't like trigger warnings only because it's a feminist concept, not really so much because they actually have a problem with a trigger warning. So I'll tell you what my issues with trigger warnings are, and maybe other people will follow in tow, because I honestly can't tell you what other anti-feminists don't like about trigger warnings. So I'll just start off with this. One, trigger warnings more than anything often strike me as a little bit redundant. And the reason why I say that is because, well, considering the type of movies or video games or articles or anything of that nature, considering, graphical nature in general, there are always warnings on television and in movies and in video games all the time. That's where you have ESBR ratings for video games. Rated E for everyone, rated E10, rated A for adult. I haven't seen very many adult games, but, they exist. They're real. Rated M for mature. Again, these ratings already exist. There's already a warning or a type of label to describe the certain phenomena in the video. So let's take this for example. In Castlevania, Castlevania 2 Lords of Shadow. Oh no, it was Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. Some woman wrote an article about this a couple years ago, where Dracula woke up from a long slumber and he slaughtered like 5 people and he killed them. It was like first-person view. It was really horrible. And the woman wrote an article about how a trigger warning was needed, or how Castlevania was exploring sexual assault or some nonsense like that. I don't know. I'll put the article in there if I can find it. But the point I was making was she put a trigger warning on the subject matter, saying that this is horrible stuff. I'm going to be talking about, rape and all of that, sexual assault in the article. But then I had to stop and think about this for a second, about how redundant it is, and how the trigger warning isn't even needed in Castlevania because it's already rated. It already has an ESBR rating of being mature, or for a mature audience, or rated teen, or whatever it's rated. The point of the matter is, there already is a warning. So then, to have a video game stop you in your forward motion out of nowhere to say, trigger warning, and we're about to experience some shit here, I guess kind of would strike me as redundant. Again, I already picked up the game. I already know this. And the same thing for any television show. I mean, the following program contains disturbing imagery. Viewer discretion is advised. It's already there. You don't really need a trigger warning. You don't really need something to pop up and say, hey, this is going to explain rape and incest and all of that. In fact, I would argue that even then, having the trigger warning itself would itself be a trigger, considering that you would have to bring up the subject matter of rape, would you not? And would that not associate, or would that not the person associate that problem with the word anyway? I don't know. So that's one issue I really have with trigger warnings. They just seem a bit redundant and sometimes unnecessary. But the actual trigger warning itself, I always kind of view it as these people, in an attempt to be a little polite, at least trying to be polite, and to that end, I can't really mock these people or be upset with these people for including trigger warnings. I just don't think that they're necessary, considering the fact that, again, movies already have ratings and they already tell you that there's going to be sensitive material in here anyway. So I guess the real problem with the trigger warning is, what is even the point of it all? And I would argue that the point of a trigger warning, again, is specifically to tell the individual in question about the specific subject matter. I mean, sensitive material isn't specific. It doesn't tell you anything. A trigger warning would specifically tell you what is going to trigger you. Again, I would imagine that is the purpose of them all. But again, as far as they actually go in practical application, I cannot mock people or be too upset with people that have them. See, my real issue with trigger warnings, honestly, would be this. And this is a problem I've never seen anyone address when it comes to trigger warnings. I've never seen anyone say this. And I find it strange that no one has ever said this, because this really seems to be the real issue with trigger warnings. I'm going to arrogantly state, if there's any problem that people should have with trigger warnings, it should be this problem right here. Are you ready for this? I'm going to explain it. And that problem is, you do understand if a person needs a trigger warning, that means that they have not healed from the trauma in their lives. That should be the ultimate problem of any trigger warning ever. If you need a trigger warning, that means that whatever problem happened to you in your life, you haven't healed from it. Which means, well, it's going to prevent you from experiencing and learning lots of things in life, because you're always going to be scared that you might be triggered. You might deal with the anxiety from it. A trigger warning specifically tells me that there are going to be people who are going to view a material or read an article that haven't healed from their trauma, who haven't healed from their pain. And instead of getting this person to at least try to deal with the stress in their life, we put warnings so they completely avoid it. And I think that, more than anything else, should be the issue with trigger warnings. That should be the problem with them. The fact that they are a huge beacon telling us that, hey, people still deal with this stress in their life and they never do anything about it. That should be the problem that people should have with trigger warnings. I mean, their practical application is silly at best, obnoxious at worst. Certainly obnoxious. I'll give you an example of an obnoxious trigger warning. Let's say there's an article where this woman got drunk and doesn't remember that she got raped. And, I mean, we don't even know what happened. She doesn't remember. So there's no real situation being described here. If you tell me, hey, trigger warning for this scenario, I would be all like, okay, well, that's a little obnoxious. I mean, nothing really happened. She doesn't remember what happened, so there's no real story being told here. She doesn't remember, so you're going to trigger a memory that never happened, or you're going to trigger the stress of not remembering what happened. And even then, it would still go to show that the person hasn't healed from the trauma, like I said earlier. Now, again, I could see a trigger warning for a story like this. Let's say there's this woman walking down the street, right? And then three guys come up behind her, right? They take her shirt, put it over her head, right? They take her upstairs to an abandoned building, right? They beat her up, okay, and then they all proceed to rape her, right? And points for anyone who can point out where I got that story from. But anyway, let's say that that was a scenario that was going to be described. If someone put a trigger warning for that, I could understand why they would, because that's graphical imagery. You're talking about rape, getting beaten, kidnapped. I could get that. Again, I would still argue that, again, it would speak to a pain inside a person that hasn't been addressed. And that, again, would be my ultimate problem with trigger warnings. Trigger warnings don't force the person, or don't even acknowledge, or don't even try to get the person to try to heal from their trauma. It's just a beacon that says, hey, the person's still dealing with this issue, so I'm going to pander to them and not get them to try to heal from it. That should be the problem of trigger warnings. Not the fact that they're obnoxious, and not the fact that they're annoying, and not even the fact that they're a feminist concept. It should be, again, in conclusion, the fact that trigger warnings, all they ever do is just show that people are still in pain and no one is trying to get these people to heal from them. They're just pandering to them. So that being said, man, I certainly hope you guys got something out of today's video, and if you did, man, go ahead and click the like button. Yeah, shoot, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Comment in the comment box below, and as always, you guys have yourselves a great day. I'll see you cool cats soon. Adios.